Hello everyone. Today I'm actually going to be reviewing two, count them, two, Disney films, because these two I think are relatively a lot more, simplistic to explain, and I figured why not combine these two together. And those two films are Chicken Little and Meet the Robinsons, that are both based off of original sort of source material that I was able to pull out. They are rather different in certain aspects. They are similar. Again, there's a lot more context in the Disney version because these particular ones sort of revolve either on like a folk tale similar to Chicken Little, where it's just this small short story, or Meet the Robinsons. This is basically a children's book, except it's called A Day with Wilbur Robinson. So it's very colorful and kid-like in that sense. So it's probably one of the most kiddie of the Disney works that I've looked at that is based upon an original source material. So they'll probably be fairly easy to kind of go over and sort of show you what each one has to offer. But basically, you need to know from where we are in Disney history. After I did Treasure Planet, there was Brother Bear, but Brother Bear was not based on anything, and I was kind of happy that I was able to skip that one. And I was also happy to skip Home on the Range because I heard just so many bad things and watched countless reviews of how that movie was just really bad, and I was so glad that it wasn't based on anything. So Brother Bear, Home on the Range, completely Disney ideas, nothing from an original source material really. So after that was Chicken Little, and basically Chicken Little, if you don't know what it's based on, it's basically based on a folktale of that same name, and I sort of have the basic kind of outline of what the original source material says, but it's rather different, I think, in its moral than the Disney work, and it has, I think, a different way of approaching children's storytelling compared to maybe something like Disney. And you'll kind of see this difference as I kind of read to you basically what it's about. So basically it goes, Chicken Little likes to walk in the woods. She likes to look at the trees. She likes to smell the flowers. She likes to listen to the birds singing. One day, while she is walking, an acorn falls from the tree and hits the top of her little head. Now it's important to note too that Chicken Little in the Disney work is a guy. He's not a girl like in the original work, because I mean it makes more sense in the original because chickens are technically when you're talking about chickens, you usually associate them with hens, but again, I'm not sure how the classification works, but kind of makes sense. But basically, I think you'll see at one point in the original, in the Disney work too, where it's kind of like a gag too that an acorn falls on its head. But really, once I explain the Disney work, you'll see how it totally drifts from what the original work says. But basically, she runs and runs. By and by, she meets the hen. "Where are you going?" asks the hen. "Oh, Henny Penny, the sky is falling and I'm going to the lion to tell him about it." "How do you know it?" asks Penny. "It hit me on the head, so I know it must be so," said Chicken Little. "Let me go with you," says Henny Penny. "Run, run." So the two run and run until they meet Ducky Lucky. "The sky is falling," says Henny Penny. "We are going to the lion to tell him about it." "How do you know that?" asks Ducky Lucky. "It hit Chicken Little on the head," says Henny Penny. "May I come with you?" asks Ducky Lucky. "Come," says Henny Penny. So all three of them run on and on until they meet Foxy Loxy. "Where are you going?" asks Foxy Loxy. "The sky is falling. We are going to the lion to tell him about it," says Lucky Ducky. "Do you know where he lives?" asks the fox. "I don't," says Chicken Little. "I don't," says Henny Penny. "I don't," says Ducky Lucky. "I do," says Foxy Loxy. "Come with me and I can show you the way." He walks on and on until he comes to his den. "Come right in," says Foxy Loxy. They all go in, and they never come out again. So yeah, very, very different than the Disney work. Sort of like a more depressing look. And a different set of morals, too. In the Disney work, there's a chicken named Chicken Little, I think. I mean, the characters aren't really memorable to me, so they kind of are a little hard to dissect, but basically the main lead, the little chicken, he ultimately believes the sky is falling, and it's not because an acorn lands on his head, but because he sees aliens, and he thinks that that's the reason the sky is falling, is because of these aliens. And you'll kind of see this with the animation if you choose to watch the film, but basically that's the gist. And the whole aspect to the story is that people have a hard time taking Chicken Little seriously, because nobody, I guess, really listens to him and what he has to say. So he's trying to convince everybody that basically the sky is falling and that they should pay attention to it, and they think that he's just spewing out nonsense. And then they actually realize, oh yeah, he was telling the truth. The sky is really falling. It's really aliens, you know, and then the moral is sort of like, you know, don't estimate children and what they're capable of expressing, I guess, and to kind of restore family bonds, in particular with Chicken Little's father, who sort of plays a kind of role in the work, and how he sort of treats him badly in the beginning, and then he learns to sort of appreciate him at the end. Even though I feel like the father was rather mean-spirited in the Disney version, the original work, obviously from what I read to you, is totally not like that. The moral is sort of based upon paranoia, and that just because you think you see something doesn't ultimately mean that's what is actually happening. It's kind of in the same way with the Disney work, in that he thought the sky was falling, but really it was aliens. But at the same time, there was still this kind of threat there. But in the original work, it totally plays into the paranoia of things. How ultimately, it's the fact that Chicken Little was so paranoid in the original work that it ultimately actually ended up leading to him, and unfortunately other people's, death. And I think that says actually a lot for a kid's story. I mean, if you could end a kid's story with, yeah, they all get gobbled up at the end, you know, it kind of shows you how, you know, people who base things upon fear and upon paranoia without really looking into it will ultimately, I guess, suffer in the end. And from actually maybe something that actually is a real threat. So I think that's really what the original work was trying to say. It's sort of dealing with the idea of paranoia, and everybody knows that line, the sky is falling, you know. It's just been so ingrained, I think, into our culture, especially with this kind of a story. But it's sort of different in the Disney work. It's played to be fairly lighthearted, very cheesy at times. The humor really didn't get to me, so I think as a film it's not really all that memorable. But at the same time, it has sort of an interesting play on, instead of the moral sort of being about paranoia, it's about accepting someone, especially when that someone is underestimated. Because ultimately the people that are underestimated really can bring about change and bring about things that are very profound in our lives. It's kind of similar with, something like Lord of the Rings. Even the smallest person can make all the difference. And that's kind of what Chicken Little sort of represents. That's why he's Chicken Little. He's sort of underestimated because nobody will take him seriously because he's a child. So that's kind of what Disney was going for. I just felt like the way that they ultimately handled it wasn't all that great, but good kind of moral context, and sort of an interesting way of approaching it in both works. Now, the next one that I wanted to briefly talk about is Meet the Robinsons. And again, this is based upon like a children's, it's more of like a picture book. It's not really like a folk tale like Chicken Little is, but it is sort of a picture book, kind of like Where the Wild Things Are, just very small amounts of text and then a lot of drawings. And basically it's called A Day with Wilbur Robinson by William Joyce. The interesting thing about the original work is that there's really not a whole lot to it. It's just about this kid named Lewis who's friends with Wilbur Robinson, and then they go one day to his house, and his house is all like futuristic and cool, and there's all these different relatives that they come across, and it's really more of about, I guess, the journey rather than kind of the destination. It's sort of played up to that idea. I guess it's more of like just a small kid-friendly story. Very simplistic, not a whole lot to it. And the closest thing that we get to a plot really is Grandpa Robinson losing his dentures, and then they end up finding it in the frog's mouth. Yeah. Kind of odd. Certain weird oddities in this book, in particular. But the Disney work has definitely a lot more context. It's established in the beginning that Lewis is an orphan in the Disney work. He's somebody who is an inventor and is very smart. It's just that he's sort of misunderstood a little. You'll see this in the beginning if you choose to watch the film. But basically, overall, what you need to know too is that not only is Lewis portrayed as an orphan, but he also doesn't really know Wilbur until one point in the beginning, sort of, where Wilbur's sort of, I guess, I don't know how you call it, I think it's sort of like a time machine slash kind of spaceship or something. It kind of crash lands during Lewis's time period, and he's like, hey, yeah, my plane crash landed, you're an inventor, can you fix it? And then Wilbur makes all these claims like, I'm from the future, and Lewis is like, what? That's crazy. And he's like, prove it, I'll fix it if I'll fix your time machine device if you can prove to me that you are from the future. And Wilbur basically takes him through time and basically kind of goes through the whole shtick of what the original source material was intending, which is to sort of show the family and how goofy and wild and insane it is. But there's also a villain in the Disney work too, unlike the original work, where I feel like there's really no villain from the research that I could pull. And basically the villain in the Disney work is named Goob, and you'll see how he was an orphaned child, and he kind of blames Lewis for sort of his misfortune. I don't think the Disney version explains this really all that well, to be honest. I don't know why you would suddenly be like, this kid is the one that ruined everything. But yeah, basically he kind of serves as the villain, and he wants to go after, I guess, Lewis and his inventions and sort of take credit for them, as sort of kind of a revenge thing. Yeah, and he's old, and just it's kind of odd. I mean, I almost felt like that they didn't really need to make a villain in the Disney work. I don't know if that was really necessary. I think just having Lewis go through this world and maybe discovering things from on his own on a more character-based level, it would be a little bit more, I guess, interesting maybe for me. But it seems like that for the most part, the Disney version ends off with sort of with the villain being defeated, but at the same time, Lewis is able to sort of go back into his real life, and it is emphasized that the future that, or, yeah, Lewis, but it's emphasized that the future that Wilbur took Lewis to is Lewis's future, and that's basically his family. So, yeah, it's kind of, it just adds a little bit more context, I think, in the Disney work. Whereas the original work, it's really just a children's story. It's just a children's picture book. It's trying to be as simplistic as it can, while being creative and interesting. And in the Disney work, they felt like they needed to add a lot more context in order to make a movie out of it, which is fairly understandable. But overall, I think that's all I can say, is that, yeah, ultimately Lewis sort of learns lessons along the way. It seems like in the original work, it's just more, I guess, directed on humor and not so much drama. Disney kind of tries to mix the two together. Sometimes I think it's a little odd, but at the same time, it's they both have their, I think, interesting moments that can be enjoyable for kids, maybe for adults as well. But it seems like the Disney work just has a lot more going on because it's a movie, and they put in a whole villain aspect to it, and then they put in the whole fact that Lewis is an orphan, and that ultimately this will be his family in the future, and provide that sort of context. But ultimately, in the end, he's adopted again, and it sort of adds an orphan-like context to it, because again, Lewis is sort of curious as to who his actual family is, if he can know really who his family was. But so there's really a lot more dimension in the Disney work, but in the original work it's way more simplistic, in that it's just basically about these two friends who've known each other, who go off on a journey. And sort of in the Disney work, it's these two people come in contact with each other. They don't really know who they are, and they go off on a journey. And it's the same kind of journey, with meeting up with all of these characters that are from this Robinson family. So yeah, that's all I think that really needs to be known about both of these works. I personally don't find them as good. Are they horrible? Maybe not as bad as like Home on the Range. Bad. I mean, I just can't find myself enjoying Home on the Range at all, or Brother Bear. But these ones, I guess you could say, are sort of the renaissance. I guess the four, like Brother Bear, Home on the Range, Chicken Little, and Meet the Robinsons. They're kind of like the four that are sort of like the Black Cauldron-like films, and that Disney doesn't really like to market them. Disney doesn't really like to praise these ones in particular. And I think it's understandable why these ones really weren't all that great. And this is Meet the Robinsons, pretty much. Well, Meet the Robinsons, and then we go to Bolt, but Bolt, it wasn't based upon anything. But after Bolt, there was this kind of break from Disney. Disney kind of stopped making animated films. I think it could have been for a variety of reasons. I think it was mostly financial. I guess the juices weren't flowing, the ideas weren't coming in, and so they felt that it would be best to kind of close it out. I think actually, yeah, Home on the Range was the last 2D animated film. The other ones, are 3D, so, or CGI. So you really get a sense of sort of where we are in Disney history. This is kind of like the 21st century now, where it's not going all that well. But once I review The Princess and the Frog, which will be in December, you'll kind of see how Disney is trying to reemerge. The studio's trying to come back. And it'd be nice to see if we can get some more good Disney films. I just would say that these ones are probably the best. But I would probably recommend maybe more the source material, actually, than the Disney versions. But for the most part, they're pretty simple. They're simple kind of kid stories. I guess just nothing ultimately all that special, but still interesting enough. But I think that's ultimately all I can say about these two. Again, this video is a little bit shorter, like 20-something minutes, because there wasn't really a whole lot to explain with these two, and I thought it would just be interesting just to talk about them both, considering that they're the kind of the forgotten Disney CGI ones. So yeah, I think that's ultimately all I can say. Any questions, comments, concerns, more than happy to answer them. But until next time, everybody. Bye-bye.